That swamp's costing you money every year in drainage taxes and mosquito control, the agricultural advisor said, spreading a map across her kitchen table. You've got 12 acres of dead water out there. Drain it, and you've got 12 acres of productive ground. I can have a crew out here next month. Cora Vance looked at the map, and at the man, and at the line he'd drawn through the swamp on her property like it was already decided. No, she said. It's not a question of cost-benefit at this point. The man continued, already reaching for his phone. The raw on drainage is, no, Cora said again. I'm keeping it. She was 32, and she'd been running the place alone for 4 years. Since her father died, and she had made a lot of decisions that the county didn't understand. But this one, refusing to drain the worst 12 acres she owned, the corner that flooded every spring, the corner that bred mosquitoes and attracted nothing but waterfowl and kept the ground permanently soggy, this one drew a particular kind of mockery. She's young, the feed store men would say. She'll figure it out. Give her time. The implication was clear. She was holding on to sentiment, holding on to her father's mistakes, not thinking like a modern farmer who understood that every acre was an asset to be optimized. The swamp was a liability wearing the skin of land, and Cora was too new to the operation to understand it. What they didn't know was that Cora had been waiting a long time to make this exact choice, and that it had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with the one conversation she'd had with her father in the months before he died. Her father, Thomas, had been sick and in the chair by the window, watching the swamp the way dying men watch things they won't get to see grow old. And Cora, sitting beside him, had asked him the question everyone asked. Why didn't he drain it? Get the land productive? Stop throwing money at a mosquito factory? And Thomas had looked at her with the clarity that sometimes comes when a man is done talking about most things, but has one thing left to say. A swamp isn't a liability, Cora. It's a battery. It holds time. Time for the earth to breathe. Time for the water to rest. Every flood that comes, we'll be grateful it's there. She'd nodded like she understood, the way you do with dying men. And Thomas had squeezed her hand once and gone back to watching the swamp, and 6 months later, he was gone, and Cora owned the place and the swamp, and she'd kept the conversation like a key. The doubter had a name and a lawsuit. He was her nearest neighbour, Martin Kessler, who farmed the ground downslope of her property, and who had begun the slow work of blaming her for everything that went wet on his land. Your swamp's backing water up onto my property, Martin said, not getting down from his tractor. You drain it proper, my ground dries out. You don't. I've got grounds to sue for the damage to my operation. He was not unkind about it. He was certain. I'm giving you notice. Drain it by next spring or I'm talking to a lawyer. Cora had listened and nodded and said she'd think about it. And then she hadn't drained it. Instead, she'd reinforced the berms, deepened the swamp's channels, made it hold better, made it deeper and more deliberate, because she understood something Martin didn't understand yet, which was that a swamp that couldn't hold water was worthless, and a swamp that could hold water was worth more than Martin Kessler could imagine, but only in a year when the rain wouldn't stop falling. The setback came the first winter, and it came at her certainty itself. A neighbour died, not from the swamp, nothing direct, but his daughter mentioned at the funeral that the family had been fighting about the drainage for years, that the father had wanted to keep the swamp, the daughter had wanted the land, and the stress had maybe contributed. Cora sat at that funeral and felt the weight of the choice she'd made, the choice that was only hers to make, and she wondered if Thomas had been wrong, if the swamp was just a sentimental thing, if she was going to spend her life defending something that nobody else valued and that kept costing her money and peace. That night she sat alone on the edge of the swamp in the cold and read Thomas's words in her head, a battery, time for the earth to breathe, and they sounded, in the dark, like the words of a dead man who couldn't be here to defend them. She sat a long time before she understood that defending them wasn't Thomas's job anymore. It was hers. The validation came 2 years on, and it came in the form of a rain that didn't stop. A system stalled over the valley for 72 hours, and the kind of rain that usually takes an hour came and stayed, dropped 4 inches in the first day, then another 3, then another 2, and the whole valley that had never prepared for this kind of flooding suddenly had rivers where roads should be. The upstream dams released water they couldn't hold. The creeks came up and over. And the farms downslope, Martin Kessler's farm first among them, began to flood. Cora watched it from high ground, watched the water rise on Martin's property, watched his equipment go underwater, watched the house begin to take water at the foundation, and she understood what Thomas had meant. Her swamp held 12 acres of standing water that was already ready to be standing water. It swallowed the overflow, held it, kept it from becoming a wall of water bearing down on the neighbours. The same rain that drowned Martin's farm, that drowned 3 other operations downslope, that washed out a county road and cost the township $100,000 in emergency repairs. That same rain moved across her land, and the swamp absorbed it, and the swamp held it, and the disaster spread itself thin across 12 acres of prepared ground instead of becoming a wall that nobody could stop. By the time the rain broke, Martin Kessler had lost everything portable and was faced with 6 inches of standing water in his house. Cora's swamp had taken the hit the county couldn't take on its own. The reckoning came when the water was still high, when Martin understood what his own swamp, if he'd kept it, if the county had kept all the swamps instead of draining them for those extra acres, might have saved him. He came up to Cora's place in a borrowed truck, muddy, exhausted, carrying the weight of the choice that wasn't his to make anymore. "You saved my farm," he said, and couldn't quite say more than that. "The swamp saved your farm," Cora corrected him, quiet, "and it would have saved it better if there were more of them, if every farmer in the valley had a swamp sitting ready. But there aren't. So this one had to be big enough for all of us." The good spread the way water spreads, to the low places first. The county, facing what had been a preventable disaster, started looking at its wetlands differently. Farms that had drained swamps for extra acreage began asking questions about restoring them. Martin Kessler, when his place dried out, didn't sue Cora. He asked her to help him rebuild his swamp. The one that had existed before his grandfather drained it in the 20s. And Cora, who could have held a grudge, instead taught him what her father had taught her, which was how to let the earth breathe. Within 5 years, there were 3 restored swamps in the valley, and they held a storm that came through the next autumn that would have been catastrophic if the swamps weren't there. The insurance companies noticed. The State Environmental Agency noticed. And Cora Vance, who had been the young woman everyone pitied for holding on to worthless land, became the woman everyone came to learn from. Not because she'd been right, but because her father had been right, and because she'd had the stubborn grace to believe in something nobody else could see. She kept her father's chair by the window, and she sat in it sometimes and looked out at the swamp the way Thomas used to look at it, watching the water hold through the seasons, watching the cattails grow thick, watching the place do exactly what it was meant to do: hold time, hold water, hold the valley when the sky opened and wouldn't close. And every spring, when the migrating birds came to rest in the swamp on their way north, and every autumn when they came back south, Cora would stand at the edge of the water and say the line her father had left her, the line that had nearly cost her everything to believe in, the line that had turned out to be the truest thing in the whole county. A swamp isn't a liability. It's a battery. It holds time, time for the earth to breathe, time for the water to rest. She had kept it when keeping it looked like folly, and the folly had turned out to be the only wisdom in a valley that had spent 100 years draining everything that held water, until the year it rained, and there was nothing left to hold it but one young woman's stubborn refusal to do what everyone said was right. If you've ever kept something the world told you to destroy, and waited for the year you knew it would matter, Tell us about it in the comments. We read them all. The moral runs as quiet as water through a swamp. The things we're told to eliminate are so often the exact things that save us when the weather turns hard. And the ones who refuse to drain their swamps are rarely the ones who lose when the rain won't stop. Tell us where you're listening from tonight, and about the person who taught you that the things the world calls waste are sometimes the only things standing between us and disaster. If this story reached you, share it with someone still holding on to a swamp in the face of mockery. And whatever wet, soggy, seemingly useless corner you're protecting right now, may you have the stubbornness to keep it, the faith to believe in it, and the quiet vindication, one flooded year, of watching everyone finally understand why you refuse to let it go.